Okay, so here's a funny thing. Before Trump visited China, I had an argument with my wife. I told her there was no way China and the United States were going to make a big deal together. I said, look at the internet. Look at how all the Chinese people are cursing America for attacking Iran, for starting a fight. She told me not to worry and said that after the meeting, things would change. Then yesterday, she ran into my room and said, oh my God, have you been watching what's happening online? So after Trump visited, the entire Chinese internet completely turned against Iran. They were saying things like, how dare the Iranians block the deal? How dare the Iranians destroy the world's economy? The Americans should go in and just finish the job. So Chinese people, first and foremost, are not driven by beliefs or politics. They love money, and that's it. Let me explain what is actually happening on the ground. Iran's economy was already on life support before a single American bomb was dropped. Iran's money had lost over 80% of its value in just 3 years. Prices were rising above 40% every year, and ordinary Iranians could not afford basic food. The government was paying for bread, paying for fuel, paying for everything. And still, people were angry. So when the Americans began their bombing campaign, they did not actually have to destroy Iran because Iran was already destroying itself from the inside. What the Americans did, and this is the clever part of the strategy, if you want to call it clever, is they simply sped up a process that was already happening. You bomb Kharg Island, you cut off oil exports, you block the strait, and now a government that was already financially bleeding just bleeds out faster. That is not war in the traditional sense. That is surgery. And here's what people do not understand about war in the 21st century. Before the 20th century, you won wars by beating armies on a battlefield. In World War II, you won by destroying a country's ability to make weapons. The heavy bombing of Germany, the heavy bombing of Japan, that is how the Allies won. They bombed those countries until they physically could not produce weapons anymore. But that is not how war works today. Today, you have social media. Today, you have populations of 80 or 90 million people. You cannot just bomb your way to victory. So what do you do instead? You choke, you isolate, you create the conditions for the population to remove the government themselves. That is the playbook, and it is being carried out almost perfectly against Iran right now. Now, the Iranians are not stupid. They understand this playbook. The problem is that understanding a trap and being able to escape it are two completely different things because the trap is economic. And when your economy collapses, your options disappear fast. The government has to choose between feeding the military and feeding the people. And the moment it chooses the military, it loses the people. And the moment it loses the people, it loses everything. And that is exactly where we are right now. The ceasefire that happened, a lot of people celebrated it. I want to be very honest here. That ceasefire was a strategic disaster for Iran. Not because war is good, but because the moment that ceasefire happened, the international pressure that was building against America, the protests, the anger, the public opinion, all of it just disappeared. People moved on. It is the same thing we saw with Gaza. The first time the Israelis went in, the whole world was outraged. Then there was a ceasefire, people relaxed, and then the Israelis went back in, and the second time around, people were indifferent. Because human beings have a limited amount of outrage inside them. And once that outrage is used up, the empire can do whatever it wants. So now you have Iran in a ceasefire. The public has lost interest. The economic choking is continuing quietly. And Americans are repositioning for the next phase. What is the next phase? 3 things are happening at the same time. First, the economic choking continues. That is the slow suffocation strategy. Second, you have ground operations. Not a full invasion, but targeted military moves in the northwest with the Kurds and in the southeast with the Baloch fighters near the Pakistani border. These are ethnic minorities with long-standing grievances against Tehran, and they're being armed, financed, and given a reason to fight. And the third part is Tehran itself. Cutting power, cutting water, cutting railways, making the daily life of ordinary Iranians so unbearable that they start demanding a political solution. You do not need to kill the government. You just need to make the people want to remove it. And here is the part nobody's talking about. Iran knows all of this. Iran has one real escalation option left. that would change the entire equation. Those undersea cables that run through the Strait of Hormuz, the internet cables that power global banking and global communications. Iran could cut them tomorrow. A third of the world would lose internet access. The global financial system would freeze. It would be a catastrophe. The only reason Iran has not done it is because it would also hurt China. And China is the one relationship Iran cannot afford to destroy. Which brings us back to where this all connects. China just gave America a green light. The phrase Xi Jinping used was strategic stability. And what that means in plain language is we accept what America is doing in Iran. Just do not bring the chaos to our doorstep. Do not disrupt global trade. Finish this fast and keep things stable. So Iran is now fighting America without Chinese support, without Russian military backing, with a collapsing economy, and with a population that is exhausted and angry at its own government. That is what total collapse actually looks like. Not a dramatic moment, not a single battle, just a slow, suffocating, and inevitable unraveling. And we are watching it happen in real time. Now let us talk about what comes after, because this is the part that actually matters, and almost nobody is discussing it seriously. When a government collapses under these conditions, economic choking, ethnic uprisings, population revolt, what fills the empty space is almost never what the empire planned for. Look at Iraq. The Americans went in, removed Saddam, and handed the country to Iranian-backed militias. They did not plan that. It just happened. Because nature hates an empty space. And whoever is most organized on the ground when the central government falls is whoever takes power. In Libya, they removed Gaddafi. And now you have 3 competing governments and open slave markets. In Syria, they tried to do the same thing and it took 14 years and still is not resolved. So the question you have to ask is, who is the most organized force on the ground in Iran right now? And the honest answer is, nobody knows. The Kurds in the northwest are organized, but they want their own country, not to serve American interests. The Balak in the southeast are more of a criminal organization than a political movement. The Iranian community living in the west has money and a social media presence, but zero presence on the ground inside Iran. And the Iranian military, and this is the thing people miss, the Iranian military is not loyal to the government in the way people think. It is loyal to its own survival as an institution. The moment the government becomes a problem, the military will quietly remove it and install something more manageable. That is the most likely outcome here. Not a democratic revolution, not an American puppet state, but a military council that negotiates a settlement, opens the oil supply, and asks the Americans to leave. And the Americans will accept that because all they actually need is the oil flowing and the nuclear program shut down. They do not actually care who runs Tehran as long as Tehran is not a threat. And here's where it gets really interesting from a global perspective. Because the moment Iran settles, the moment the oil comes back online, you have a massive flood of supply hitting the global oil market. And prices collapse. And who does that hurt the most? Russia. Russia's entire war economy is funded by oil money. You cut the oil price in half, and Russia cannot keep its military operations going in Europe. Which means the Iran settlement and whatever happens next in Ukraine are actually connected. This is one grand strategy being played across multiple chessboards at the same time. The Chinese understand this completely. That is why Xi used the language he used. Strategic stability is not a compliment, it is an acknowledgement. It is China saying, we see what you are doing, we understand the full chessboard, and we are stepping back because the alternative is worse for us. China needs stable oil prices. China needs global trade routes open. China needs the dollar system working. And as long as America is surgically taking apart Iran without blowing up the global economy, China will sit on its hands. So where does that leave ordinary Iranians? That is the question I keep coming back to. Because at the end of all this geopolitical chess, the game theory, the empire strategies, the grand bargains, there are 90 million people whose lives are being decided by forces completely outside their control. Their savings have been wiped out by rising prices. Their young people are leaving by the hundreds of thousands every year. And their government is spending whatever resources remain on military survival instead of feeding its own population. And the outside world, the people who were protesting and holding signs 3 months ago, have already moved on to the next thing. That is what empires do. They do not just defeat governments. They exhaust populations. They make people so tired, so financially desperate, so politically hopeless that they stop resisting and start just trying to survive. And once a population reaches that point, it will accept almost any political settlement just to make the pain stop. That is not victory through force. That is victory through exhaustion. And it is far more effective and far more brutal than any bomb. The collapse of Iran is not going to look like a dramatic moment on your newsfeed. There will be no single image that defines it, the way the fall of the Berlin Wall defined the end of the Cold War. It is going to be quiet. It is going to be gradual. It is going to look like a currency that keeps losing value, a government that keeps making concessions, a military that quietly negotiates behind closed doors, and a population that is simply too exhausted to fight anymore. And when that settlement finally comes, and it will come, the headlines will say, America won. But the real story is more complicated than that. Because what America will have won is a broken country, an unstable region, and a whole new set of problems that will take another generation to manage. That is how empires work. They solve one problem and create 3 more, and the cycle continues. That is what is happening. That is the full picture. And now you cannot say, nobody told you.